great to be joined today by TJ Kirk, also known as the Amazing Atheist. He has been on YouTube since really some of the early days of the site, posting about religion and politics, social issues, over 1 million subscribers. Not a frequent interviewee, TJ, so I appreciate you joining me today. I know you're not huge on being interviewed.
Yeah, I get nervous when I can't control everything, so you know.
All right. Well,
But
I
thank you
appreciate you
thank you for inviting me on. I appreciate you sharing your platform with me here today. We have an interesting, robust discussion.
Yeah, so I mean, let's just start talking about, my audience knows about YouTube demonetization, which hit us starting May 31st, 2017, a very important day in David Pakman show history. We've since seen Twitter sort of involved in what some are calling deplatforming. You were banned from Twitter for some time. Let's go back to the sort of beginning. I mean, when did you start experiencing these sort of rough patches in terms of your content's place on YouTube and dealing with the demonetization of individual videos?
There was a time before the big demonetization thing where one of the most difficult things about YouTube to me is their tendency to apply rules retroactively. So, the TOS doesn't change. It's just the way it's enforced changes very suddenly. So like in the very early days of YouTube, there was a lot of drama between people, a lot of people fighting one another, making very brutal attack videos against one another. And I mean, it still happens to some extent, but there was a time when it was kind of the bread and butter of YouTube. And then retroactively, like, nope, this is all bullying now. And then people who made videos that hitherto were acceptable were being, kicked off the platform. So that was the first big indicator, like, whoa, this isn't just Mad Max free speech zone. And then YouTube did this crackdown on profanity probably around like 2010 or something. If you go back to look at my videos around 2009, 2010, you'll see that I bleep my profanity. So there's that. And then, of course, the adpocalypse, which I know you suffered from, and every YouTube creator I've talked to has suffered from.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, my problem, I have, in the context of what's been going on with you and, Alex Jones, very notably over the last couple of weeks, I don't have a problem with a private website having a privately owned website, rather, of course. They are open to the public in terms of accounts. I don't have a problem with terms of service. I don't have a problem with terms of service being enforced. What I think is sort of a cop-out is that most terms of service include a provision along the lines of, this is all basically up to our judgment. And that's where this selective enforcement, group enforcement, where a bunch of platforms will decide at the same time that they're going to target a specific type of content or even a specific creator. Those are my concerns. Like, I don't really care about Alex Jones's content per se. I think it's whacked out. And I think if there's anything illegal about what he's doing, it may be about how he's representing some of those scam supplements. But I'm concerned with the selective and subjective enforcement of the terms of service. Do you agree, or is your concern a different one?
If I ever decided to print out a copy of the terms of service, I'd probably do it on toilet paper because that's the only use I really have for it. The terms of service and community guidelines are written to be vague enough that a huge range of content can be, censored or permitted, not based on rules, but strictly on the whims of the platform. These platforms don't enforce rules. They enforce a culture. And we've seen their double standards manifest in dozens of ways over the years. Like, I don't know how familiar are you with Kyle Kalinske.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know
Secular
Kyle personally,
Talk. Yeah, I mean, he had to resort to using, funny spellings of things with weird accents over vowels and stuff that didn't really apply, just to try to get around YouTube's language policing. If I want to talk about something going on in Syria, I have to make sure to spell it with a weird I that has 3 dots above it, But CNN can do that. MSNBC can do that. So, I mean, my problem with it is my problem with all these TOSs, I guess, is just they're not applied consistently. They never have been. YouTube has gone through several cultural shifts in terms of how it polices itself since I've been here, about 12 years. So I don't care about the TOS. I don't put much stock in the TOS because it doesn't mean anything. It's just a bunch of words. They just do what they want.
When it comes to Twitter, your Twitter account of over 100,000 followers was suspended about a week and a half ago. It's now reinstated. You sent out a satirical tweet. Can you talk a little bit about what happened and how it went down?
Yeah, there was Sarah Zhong. I think that's how her name is pronounced. I don't know how familiar you are or your audience is with the situation, but she had a host of tweets about white people. I enjoy when white people suffer because whatever. She's an Asian woman. And she was hired at the New York Times. I forget the position she was hired for, but a lot of people got upset. I wasn't upset, but I found the situation amusing, so I decided to put out some sort of commentary on it because it was a hot topic. I didn't take any sort of position one way or the other, but I just kind of mocked the situation I put my own tweet out there that was an over-the-top satirization of her anti-white people jokes or tweets. I just, white people deserve to be genocided. Every last cracker, one of them should die. Some ridiculously over-the-top thing. And then at the end of it, I said, hey, New York Times, how about a lucrative job? I think I've shown the qualifications. That was the little joke I made. And I tweeted it and I thought nothing of it.
You were sort of calling into question the decision of the New York Times to hire someone who had messages like that in their internet history.
I don't really think I was even doing that. I think I was just trying to honestly ride the wave of people talking about it. I had no strong opinion one way or the other. I feel like if she wants to make jokes about white people on Twitter, she can do that. And if New York Times wants to hire her, they can do that. I have no objection to really any of that. But I just wanted to have some sort of generic sort of commentary, at least making fun of, to me, the ludicrousness of the situation. Not from I'm taking a stance sort of position, but just from isn't this funny? And anyway, they decided that it was hate speech against white people, I guess. I didn't feel like it was. I think most people who looked at the tweet were like, oh, this is satirizing the Sarah Zhong situation. I made several appeals that were rejected to Twitter. It wasn't until people like Glenn Greenwald and Kyle Kalinske started tweeting about it that Twitter changed its mind.
And in your view, other people tweeting about it did get them to change their mind?
I think especially when Glenn Greenwald did. I know that he has connections with the higher echelons of Twitter.
What do you think the policy should be? I mean, there's a spectrum when it comes to so-called free speech. And by free speech, we don't mean First Amendment as legally bound by the Constitution. We just mean the platforms of what people, the principle of free speech. A popular spot people fall on is if it's not illegal, it should be allowed. Where are you?
I don't know if you've heard the talking point that's cropped up recently about treating social media platforms like public utilities and regulating them accordingly.
Yeah, I mean, not only have I read about that, there actually would be a legal infrastructure dating back to the 60s which would establish that. It's not been done.
Right. That's been a talking point of mine for at least 5 years now. And I've been trying to propagate it. I've found practically no assent among friends, among enemies, among anybody. But in the wake of recent events, I've found far more fertile soil for that talking point. And I've heard it coming from prominent voices on the left and the right. My hope is that maybe we're seeing the nascent stages of sort of a bipartisan coalition for not only the protection of free speech, but for the expansion of freedom of speech. So I definitely think I throw my hat in with the, if as long as it ain't illegal, I think you should be able to say it. I think that if a social media platform reaches a certain level where it becomes a tool of mass communication, then I think that there does need to be some encroachment of free speech protection into that platform, because otherwise we're censoring certain ideas from what I consider to be a public space, be it privately owned or not.
So I guess the idea would be, if a platform is so ubiquitous as a means of communication, and I think that the president regularly using it to put out what have been deemed by courts to count as presidential statements, once it has reached that level, it's no longer just a company saying, we allow some content, we don't allow others, we have terms of service, we might enforce these selectively or not at all, or exactly by their letter. There would be some new standard with which they would have to adhere to.
Well, look, at some point, people are going to have to decide what set of rights matters more: the rights of a private company to control their platforms, or the rights of the millions and millions, in fact, billions sometimes, of users of these platforms to be able to have freedom of expression and freedom of speech. This is a country that's founded on that ideal. I consider freedom of speech to be the linchpin of our democracy. So are we going to allow that to in some way die? Because, the conversation has moved on to these platforms. These are the public square where people go and stand on the soapbox and rant. So if we're going to say that we allow private corporations to control these things, then we're basically saying, well, private corporations now control the discourse in our country. I'm not comfortable with that. I'm much more comfortable with their rights as private companies being infringed.
Yeah, and that is increasingly the area of debate, which is, where does a business's, I don't even really want to call it right to self-determination, but right to make decisions that they perceive as being the best business decisions for them, how far does it go when these platforms do become sort of clearinghouses or central squares, as you mentioned? I think the good news, at least in the short term, although it's not really a solution, TJ, to what we're talking about, is that you are back on Twitter. And over the long term, it's very clear that this is not something that's going to be solved quickly, and it's a debate that's going to continue.
Yeah, I agree.
TJ Kirk, known to many of you as the Amazing Atheist. You can find him on YouTube. He's been there for a very long time, longer than the David Pakman Show, and we've been there for quite a long time as well. TJ, really appreciate you talking to us today.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.